the role where my soul matches what I'm doing in the moment. And when I have that sense of peace or that sense of excitement or that sense that, boy, I can't wait to do that again, that holds the key to the elements of who you are. Not so much what you do, but who you are, what your values are, what it is that makes you unique and special, and also what I believe you were meant to do on this earth.
Welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast, the show where we teach you how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want.
Doctor! 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 Doctor!
Now, here's your host, Dr. Alex Schloe.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast. Today, I am honored to have Dr. Joe Sherman on the podcast. He actually graduated from the same medical school as me a few years before and is a board-certified pediatrician. He's got 37 plus years of experience. He's worked with underserved and medically complex children in the United States, in Uganda, in Bolivia. He has an incredible personal journey that he's going to share with us today about burnout, perfectionism, anxiety, and how he transitioned that into coaching and physician well-being advocacy. Really excited to have Dr. Joe Sherman on the podcast. Joe, is there anything that you'd add to that introduction? I know that was not enough to do justice, but grateful to have you here.
That was perfectly concise and right on the button. Thank you very much, Alex.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you here all the way from Seattle. And like we were talking about beforehand, it's always so cool to connect with other docs from MCV, now VCU School of Medicine, and just learn about the awesome things that people are doing that started there. So do you mind just giving us a little context about your path, pediatrics, and what drew you into working with underserved communities?
Sure. First of all, my path into medicine really arose from several factors. One is I grew up in the city of Washington, D.C., and was the youngest of 7 kids. Part of it was trying to find a profession that my older siblings were not interested in and did not pursue. A little bit of a competitive edge in my family. So that's part of it. The other part is that I found from an early age that I really enjoyed accompanying other people through coaching sports and tutoring and different activities such as that. And did have one experience, a cousin when I was a teenager who had myocarditis, this kind of idiopathic myocarditis as a young kid, as 12 years old. And I would go visit him at the hospital when I was a teenager and became kind of interested in what was going on around. I think I would have paid more attention to why I really enjoyed being there, which was more about being with him and accompanying him rather than so much of the science that was going on around. But all of it interested me. And then going to college, I studied biomedical engineering, mostly because it's kind of like, if you don't get in medical school, you need a plan B. And engineering was my plan B. But it also was a great pre-medical major to have. And then moving on to medical school, it was really there, I think, in Richmond, Virginia, and the population of VCU's hospital is predominantly an inner city population, where you always get referrals from all over the state, really. However, the bread and butter patients that we took care of, both when I was in medical school as well as staying on there for 3 years of pediatric residency, were most inner city marginalized populations, either because of low income or because of race or because of whatever social circumstance and medical conditions that they encountered. And I think I really believe that those people taught me how to be a doctor, and really feel like as a medical student and as a resident, I learned how to be a doctor by practicing medicine on those folks who lived in and around Richmond. And so that really interested me in this complex care of underserved populations, the kind of psychosocial medical model that I was exposed to there.
That's great. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that as well. I always wanted to do family medicine for a similar reason and was really fortunate that MCV had started the I2CRP program, which was the International Inner City Rural Preceptorship Program. And I was fortunate to get into that. It's a quote unquote honors program. And I don't know why they picked me, but I'm grateful they did. And it was a really cool opportunity to really get interwoven within the fabric of the city. I got to work at a free clinic a couple times per month from first year of med school all the way until when I left at Crossover Clinic. And it was so cool to be able to serve, be in that free clinic environment, provide care for the folks who needed it most. And I completely agree with you, Dr. Sherman. Like that transformed everything for me about how I approach medicine, how I think about medicine, being cost conscious. And then you get into the military. In the military, everything's covered by TRICARE, and you don't even think about that for a little bit. And I've recently now pivoted into direct primary care and getting back into serving the community and getting interwoven and practicing cost-conscious medicine brings me back to that. And so I'm really grateful for the training that I received there and for that. But I agree, it's just such a joy to get to practice in your community and serve some folks who are in those underserved environments.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you say that pathway exists now because back, 44 years ago, whatever it was, I began medical school. There weren't tracks and pathways and things like that. And it was really my senior year of residency in pediatrics where I had what we called an away elective, which basically meant you had no call responsibilities for a month. And I had a friend that had done some volunteer work in Belize. And I had never left the country at that point in my life. And I decided that I would do that. So I went for a month and worked at a small clinic on the border of Belize and Guatemala. And that was something that no one in my residency program had ever done. Most people kind of go to some town or somewhere where they think they might be practicing when they finish residency. But for me, that was a way that I could expand my horizons and see what it was like to work internationally. And that was an amazing experience.
What were some stories or things that you remember about that trip? First time out of the country and, first time doing international medicine. What was that like for you?
The first thing I remember is leaving the hospital pretty much. And this is the kind of memories I have. And I know it wasn't like this, but it was almost like I was off call, run home, grab a suitcase, go to the airport, fly to Miami, fly to Belize, and land and get picked up by this person who was my host family sponsor person, picked up in a pickup truck and driven across the country from the east coast of Belize to the west coast of Belize, the west border next to Guatemala, and just having a little bit of high school Spanish and really not much else. And the folks there spoke this they were mestizo mixtures of mostly Mayan descendants, as well as some of the Spanish and Belize has a rich history of all kinds of colonization and everything. So several sections of the small country speak different languages, but there was predominantly a kind of a mestizo indigenous language and Spanish. So at least I had Spanish and some people spoke English too, but that was the big thing, just the culture shock of going from an inner city developed hospital to this tiny, tiny town with dirt roads and little government clinic that existed there in that town. The other big memory is that I got chicken pox while I was down there, and going through a pediatric residency and never having chicken pox as a child. This was before any vaccines existed, like for chicken pox, and then having a couple of scares of exposure during residency where I had to be isolated and taken out of any clinical rotations. I guess it caught up to me finally but I was overseas. So that was an unpleasant period of that rotation. But I was able to tack on an extra week at the end because my chief resident was also my roommate. So that was a good connection to have. So he allowed me to add on an extra week because I lost one with chickenpox.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have been fortunate to be able to do some mission trips to El Salvador, Costa Rica, Zimbabwe, and every time I'm just struck by how, regardless of the current state of the United States and beliefs, et cetera, how blessed we are to live here, how blessed we are to have the resources that we do and to have the access to the internet and clean water and electricity and all these things that we take for granted every day. And I think it's really important for folks to have those international experiences. I mean, in Zimbabwe, we were seeing crocodile bite, puff adder bites, and all kinds of trauma and tons of HIV, AIDS, and TB. I saw POTS disease there, where the TB into the spine. And I mean, it's just all these things that you read about in the textbooks and all these things that we almost kind of take for granted. And then you go over there and you're like, wow, this is reality and this is real. And I can make a difference by doing this. And so I'm definitely looking forward to, as time has kind of expanded and had some more time as I'm not practicing every day, definitely looking forward to being able to do some more international trips. And, there's a ton of need in the States too. So maybe that looks like doing some more rural medicine or something along those lines as well. So lots of need, but I think nonetheless that it's so rewarding to get those experiences and have those experiences. But as we get busier and busier in life, we have to search for those and we have to be willing to take the time to do that. But it oftentimes fills your cup back up.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. And I think I've written about this and talked about how volunteering as a physician, because we do have such sought after skills and the privilege of being able to be welcomed into patients' lives in ways that other folks are not, that this is often a preventative measure for burnout and can mitigate burnout if you are able to work in a situation where you feel you are truly valued and that you have something to offer.
Absolutely. I love that. I know you spent some time in Uganda and Bolivia as well, correct?
That's correct, yes.
How did those experiences shape your view of medicine and purpose?
Yeah, my experiences in Belize and then later when I started practicing pediatrics and I came back to Washington, D.C., I worked initially at a private practice in pediatrics. It was not a good fit for me. It was a time that I struggled greatly with anxiety and feeling as if I was misplaced. I was in the wrong place. Fortunately, I was also volunteering at a clinic in a neighborhood in DC called Columbia Heights. And at the time, this was the late 80s, which was the peak of the crack epidemic in DC. But I worked in a small clinic that was also a transitional shelter for families. And I worked alongside of my friends that were doing educational work. We're doing housing, we're doing social services, legal services. So we really felt like we could encompass these families with a lot of services. That continued. And then I also, every couple of years or so, took a trip overseas, either to Dominican Republic a couple of times or to Central America. So I kept that up because I really enjoyed that cross-cultural medicine and could see where my experience overseas as well as my experience domestically kind of really complemented each other. I was fortunate to meet my wife, who was also interested in international work. She is a clinical psychologist and had done some study abroad in East Africa and Kenya. And so when we got married, we both had this interest, and she's much more of the go-getter kind of idea person in our family. And we wanted to travel overseas and live overseas. And she said, well, I have an idea. I've been in East Africa. You haven't. We could honeymoon in East Africa and you can kind of see what it's like and we can decide what we're going to do. After we did that, we made this decision that we would spend some time living in East Africa before we had kids. After we have kids, then we would try Latin America. That was the plan then. So I was fortunate, after looking all over, trying to find a position in any way that might pay expenses, I was able to get, of all things, a pathology fellowship position as a pediatrician. It was working in a clinic that was conducting clinical trials on maternal child HIV transmission prevention in Kampala, Uganda. And I got a job working as the pediatrician in the clinic. So it was a clinical job, even though it was with a research team. And so I took care of the newborns, infants, and children that were born to women diagnosed with HIV at the time, and then given, depending on the arm of the study, either AZT, nevirapine. I think there were a couple of other medications we were studying to try to prevent the transmission from the mother to the baby. It was a very challenging time for my wife and I. We both we were working. She was teaching psychology and doing some child development work there, but there were no antiretrovirals available at all anywhere in the country, in the continent that I knew of, except for people who were very wealthy. So we were only offering the opportunity for this mom to prevent transmission, but other than general medical care, we didn't have antiretrovirals to treat people diagnosed with HIV, which at the time I thought, well, there's just too many people. It's overwhelming. And what I realized later was kind of more of the will of more developed countries to end pharmaceutical companies and funding organizations to really make it a priority that anyone with HIV has the right to access to medication. So that being exposed to a lot of death, a lot of suffering, mostly actually from malnutrition, TB, malaria, diarrhea, measles, tetanus, every vaccine preventable disease I saw. And so it makes me a little bit more of a vaccine passionate person. But that was our experience in Uganda. Later, we came back. We moved to Seattle, where my wife is from and her family lived. We had 2 kids. And it was I got a job teaching in a family medicine program, teaching pediatrics. About 5 years after we got back, we went to a presentation on living in mission as a family overseas. And my wife was like, that's it. That's a sign. We have our kids. They're 4 and 2 at the time. And when they're 5 and 3, we'll be overseas. This is perfect. So that's what happened.
That's amazing. What was that like to have young children and just take the leap and be like, we're going to do this. We're going to live in mission. This is a sign. Let's go. What was that like for you? Was there any consternation or difficulty deciding?
I was terrified. I think it was already an adjustment for me to move from Washington, D.C., where all my family lived, over to the Pacific Northwest, where I really didn't know anybody. I really relied on my wife's family. Didn't know anybody as far as getting a job either, so that was a challenge at first. But I have to say that going overseas and living in Latin America, and we lived in Bolivia. We were part of a mission organization, and we were there for 4 years. It was a commitment that we made. And once we made that commitment and we were able to kind of project what it was going to be like and really lean on each other and our community for support, it really ended up being the most influential and the greatest time for our family, I believe. My kids when we left, they were 5 and 3. And when we came back, they were 9 and 7. And for them, it left a lasting impression. I'm not sure how many specific memories, especially my younger daughter remembers, but for me, it was transformative. It really did integrate who I believe I really was meant to be and really was as a pediatrician at certain times in my career. So it brought that revelation and insight to me.
That's beautiful. Yeah, we just spent some time in Europe on vacation, and we've talked a lot about mission work or just having that international experience with our kids. And I see my niece and nephew in Germany, and they're amazing. My little 2-year-old nephew, Luke, was like talking German. They've only been there since November, and we're in the elevator and he's like talking German to this German lady. We have no idea what they're discussing or what they're saying. And it was just so cool to see how fast they've picked up the language and how cool it is for them to experience that culture. And that's something that we want for our kids as well at some point in the future. And I think it can really be transformative for them to experience those different cultures, that different language, being in a developed country, seeing dad work really hard, taking care of really sick patients, I'm sure, and those sorts of things, I'm sure they will not forget. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, for our children, like when I look back in retrospect, I can see all the wonderful times and the community bonding. And because we had kids, the indigenous population that we worked among when we were both there, my wife is a clinical psychologist. She was putting on workshops. She was teaching. She was helping people, supervising psychologists there. And we were all doing community education, community development work. It was a chance for us to, both of us, to experiment with all kinds of different activities, which was really fantastic. There were some rough times, the transitions. Our kids were we moved several times. They had to go from one school to another school. Fortunately, they were very young. So they always say that this type of acculturation of children seems to be acute, and then it's done. For adults, it's a little bit more of a chronic process. But once we did get settled and we had a stable community, which was predominantly all Bolivians, we did have our mission community of expats that we would get together with periodically. But predominantly, we hung out with the folks that we worked with and we lived among in our community.
That's fantastic. What was it like after you wrapped up your time in Bolivia? I'm assuming came back to the States. What was it like as you transitioned from practicing medicine in Bolivia to coming back to the United States and in our system?
Yeah, well, this is a little bit of a difficult story because one thing to know about me is that from the time I referred to before, in residency and then right afterwards, I really had a difficult time with anxiety and feeling that I was in the wrong place. I wasn't sure. I had somatic symptoms of that with back pain, headaches, and numbness. And fortunately, at that time, I was able to get support through a psychiatrist and therapy and be able to be supported. And that continued to help me understand where it was that I felt most comfortable, where I felt I was meant to be. But sometimes I would go through these periods where I would get so deeply absorbed into my work. I would get kind of hooked on the affirmation that came from patients and people around me about the work I was doing. And I would often kind of lose touch with what was inside of me because I was so externally focused. Then I returned and we had this amazing expansive experience in Bolivia. But when I returned back to Seattle, it was kind of like in my head, I had to start working. I had to start making money for my family. It was kind of like, okay, we had our time of adventure. Now it's time to get down to work. And so I got a job as a medical director in a pediatric clinic, also a teaching situation. But I really took on all the burdens of that clinic, all the administrative responsibilities, wanting to make it great for everybody involved in that clinic. And I threw myself into that. I took on, and that seemed to be not going well, and took responsibility for it and really went downhill, feeling burned out. But I think more this idea that I was responsible, I had to make it right. And that really took me downhill. And I eventually got depressed. I had to quit, stepped away from that job and spent some time in recovering from that. And in that time, really looked back at all the experiences I had had in my life where I felt most myself, most alive, most at peace, most at who I was in what I did. And in the process of doing that through coaching, therapy, spiritual direction, every possible help I could get, reading books, I was able to return back to medicine, and I worked part-time in a couple of different clinics. But then I also wanted to start supporting other health professionals, especially physicians, understand the culture and the philosophy that we were brought up in through our training and how that was contradictive and counter to our well-being and being able to have that balance in life. And so that's how it got me into individual coaching for physicians and other health professionals, as well as retreat facilitation.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I know it probably is difficult to be vulnerable and share the struggles that you've had. And I know there's a lot of people that are listening to this podcast who feel that same way, have felt that same way, and have not known how to overcome that. I mean, myself, I also struggled with a lot of anxiety and kind of that imposter syndrome. And there's always more to do. How am I ever going to catch up? How am I going to practice medicine how I want to, take care of patients how I want to when I only have 5 minutes with them, when I only have 10 minutes with them, when we're running really far behind? And I think that we all struggle with that. And it's really important to hear these stories and hear your journey and see that there's ways around that. There's things that can help with that. As you've been working with physicians, have you noticed or recognized early signs of burnout? Or do you have any guidance in terms of folks who may be experiencing burnout, they don't even notice it, some ways that they can combat that early on, besides like the pizza party that the clinic probably has?
Yes, I think burnout actually is getting a lot more press, notoriety, and awareness, I think, now, both with individuals as well as with institutions. And I believe that there's this debate going on about whether burnout is caused by the institution and the structure of the organization, the individual, and the culture that we were brought up in. I referred to before of this self-sacrificing, never say no, never ask for help kind of philosophy. And I believe it's a combination. There's no doubt in my mind, and there may be other people of my generation who may disagree as physicians, but for me, there's no doubt that physicians nowadays are under much more pressure, much more stress. The amount of information coming at physicians these days, the amount of technology and research and the rapid expansion of knowledge is something that I never encountered when I was early on in practice. We didn't have computers. We didn't have the internet. We just had a paper chart. It was a much different world back then. So from my perspective, it's when you are trying to deal with all of the pressures and the stressors that are going on around you. And as you come home or away from the hospital or the clinic, and that's still weighing on your mind and it's still preoccupying you and distracting you, and you're still wondering about that patient, or you're still wondering about, how am I going to get my charts done and those types of things. I think that's a first sign, that sign that you cannot leave it behind and it's still spinning around in your mind. That's when, for me, it's important to get some help. It's important to understand, really, I think, with someone who can be more objective than just talking to a friend that's saying, oh, come on, you can do it. You're a great doc. Get back in there. But someone that's really looking out for your best interest. And maybe that's a family member, or maybe it's a coach, a therapist, or somebody that can help you get some perspective on things. But I think that's the sign of the kind of the preoccupation and distraction.
Yeah, I agree. That kind of emotional exhaustion, preoccupation, I think all those things certainly play into burnout. And it's hard though. I mean, I think, a lot of us, we're type A, we're hard charging. We've been trained to do more, work harder and do more. And we almost feel guilty, or almost feel we're admitting a weakness by saying like, man, I am exhausted. I am burnt out. And then the next step is admitting that and then asking for help. And I think we have a hard time as physicians at admitting that weakness, admitting that anxiety, that burnout, that stress, whatever it may be, and then asking for help, because we think that we're going to be judged for that, or that makes us less of a doctor, or that makes us less of a human. And I don't think that's the case. But personally, as I mentioned, I struggled with a lot of anxiety, and I bottled it up for a long time, to the point where it started to impact my family and my relationship with my wife. And that's when I was like, wait, what am I doing? Like, I'm not being the dad I want to be. I'm not being the husband I want to be. I'm not being the doctor I want to be. And then once I was willing to admit that and get help, everything changed. And I was like, why did I wait for so long to do this? So, if folks are listening to this and you're there, like, admitting that you need some help and getting that help is such a huge game changer for your mental health. And that's incredibly important.
Yeah, I would say today, especially folks that are in, I think all physicians, and not only physicians, all health providers, you need to have support. You need to have outside support in some way, whether that is friends, family members, coaches, therapists, whatever, you're put in a situation that you cannot go it alone. It's different. Maybe back in the day you could, but today society is not kind of conforming around you to support your life and bowing down to whatever you need. And so if that's the case, you need to get things in perspective and you need to have that other voice of reason helping you out. So from my perspective, that's a habit that should begin in medical school. It's an institutional obligation, I believe, to expose medical students and trainees to what it's like to have a coach, a therapist, a counselor, somebody else that's going to help you as you move down the road to adjust to the demands that the profession puts upon you.
Absolutely. That is well said. How do you feel like coaching can help folks that feel stuck? They feel trapped by the golden handcuffs, or as I like to say, the golden stethoscope with their job or their role. How do you help them process that, or what recommendations would you have?
The first thing I do when anyone is approaching me asking about help is to congratulate them for having the courage to do it, because it's something like we've discussed. It's something that is countercultural. It's something that you have to overcome a tremendous number of myths and cultural norms to get over. So that's a big thing. That's a huge step that you reached out for help. And then the second thing is compassion, is self-compassion. And I usually go through this process and say, if a patient were to come in to your office, or your own child were to come to you and say, I feel like I'm not matching up. I feel like I'm under stress because I just feel like I'm not enough. I'm trying as hard as I can. Would you treat that person to say, come on now, buck up, toughen up, get it back out there. You can do it. This is ridiculous. You shouldn't be complaining about these things. No, but we treat ourselves that way. And so if we're able to first show ourselves some compassion, of course we feel bad that we run up against normal human limitations. But if we're able to show ourselves compassion and then start to look in and examine, what is it that really brings me life? What is it about medicine, outside of medicine, where I really feel like I call it soul to roll, where my soul matches what I'm doing in the moment. And when I have that sense of peace, or that sense of excitement, or that sense that, boy, I can't wait to do that again, that holds the key to the elements of who you are. Not so much what you do, but who you are, what your values are, what it is that makes you unique and special, and also what I believe you were meant to do on this earth. And then we kind of look at that and say, okay, here are the core values that you really hold true. And don't deny it. These are things that are really important to you. And where does your work fit into that? Where does your life fit into that? And if it's not fitting into that, what can we do to try to either change the mindset and the perspective you have about that, or to start making some tweaks and changes? For some people, they're completely misplaced and they need to be somewhere else. But I would say for most people, it's a matter of learning new skills, such as setting limitations to what you're willing to say yes to all the time, as well as being aware of what your own physical, spiritual, intellectual, and psychological needs are. And then as you start to do that, there's some space that opens up. You don't feel as stuck. You don't feel as confined, and therefore possibility exists. And you start to think, wow, okay, I don't have to stay in the same place. It's not that, the grass is never greener on the other side. There can be another place that is more comfortable for you and fits into who you are a bit better.
That is really well said. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Sherman, I know that you contributed to a recent book that came out, White Coats, Courageous Hearts. Could you tell us a little bit about your contribution there?
Sure. This book is a compilation of several physicians' stories about their struggles, their joys, their challenges that are humans, all about being a human being in medicine. And my chapter was predominantly about the identity that we take on as doctors and all that burden that puts on us and we put on ourselves. We take that on, and that causes a tremendous amount of stress. And the key to that is self-compassion. And in my chapter, I talk about the actual practice of self-compassion, where you place your hand on your heart, which stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, which releases oxytocin, and you say words of affirmation, words of consolation to yourself in that form, breathing deeply, letting it sink in. And this actually changes the neural pathways that exist inside of us to where they're not in those constant automatic do, never say no. Instead, we have alternatives, and that we can treat ourselves with the same compassion that we treat our patients with.
I love that. Where can folks, if they want to purchase White Coats, Courageous Hearts, where can they purchase the book?
Oh, it's available on Amazon. It's also available in and you can, if you contact me, I'll be happy to try to access the book for you if you'd like. They're hoping to have a series of these books that come out from collections of different physicians. Kim Downey, who is a physical therapist, has brought us all together. She's a great physician advocate. And
that's awesome.
So yes, you can do that, and I'll be happy to lead you toward it.
That's great. Joe, you also have a podcast, correct? Beyond the Finish Line, is that correct?
Yes.
Awesome.
So Beyond the Finish Line is a series of podcasts that I did on the Influent platform for early career physicians and physicians in training. And it talks and touches on some of these topics, and several different people who took different routes in medicine, some clinical, some non-clinical, some a mixture in and out of that. I think today's world allows physicians to have a broader choice. Many of us feel like we're actually have less choice because the majority of physicians now are employed and they have to pretty much play the party line of the institution that they work for. I think I work also with institutions to try to increase engagement of frontline practitioners into policy and procedures that they have to follow. But also, I believe that we have many other choices that are both clinical and non-clinical. I think that will expand in the future.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of cool opportunities as AI changes medicine and a lot of these other changes in medicine happen. I think we're going to see more unique opportunities that pop up, which is quite exciting. Dr. Sherman, if you could give one last piece of advice to a physician early in their career to help them thrive long term, what would that advice be?
That advice would be spend some time understanding who you are outside of the white coat, outside of your ambition, your dream of being a doctor. What is it that exists inside of you that it doesn't matter whether you're being a doctor, whether you're being a friend, whether you're being a partner, whether you're being a parent, but whatever it is that makes you, you, focus on that, reflect on it, meditate, journal, be creative at how you can integrate that into your life so that you can continue to hold on to that thread throughout the rest of your life. Because if you don't, you will lose it. Because there are several other people you will run into in your medical training who want to give you their threads and want you to take that on. And in return, they'll give you honors or a recommendation or a letter or whatever it is, if you can be more like them. So you have to hold on to who you are.
That is beautiful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that expert advice there. Where can folks reach out to you if they want to connect and know more, Dr. Sherman?
Sure. Thanks so much. You can access my website, joeshermanmd.com. It's very easy to get to. And you can reach out to me by email, joe@joeshermanmd.com. I also have a LinkedIn page, Joe Sherman MD. And those are the ways to get in touch with me. And I would love to talk to anyone that's interested in these topics or who is looking for some support in making their way through a challenging but very rewarding profession.
Absolutely. I think we can all work on letting go of outdated ideals, embrace balance, embrace self-compassion. I think that's really going to lead to thriving in the current medical climate. So really excited to have you on the podcast today, Dr. Sherman. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Alex. I appreciate it.
Awesome. With that, it's been Dr. Joe Sherman and Dr. Alex Schloe with another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast, signing off. Hey, real quick, if you're still listening to this, I'm assuming you got value from it. So I need your help specifically. My 2-year vision with this podcast is to help 100,000 physicians learn how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want. There are 2 main ways that a podcast grows. One is through ratings and reviews, and the other is word of mouth. If you can please leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as send this to 1 to 2 friends that you think would get value from it, we can reach the physicians that we want to reach. Thanks in advance, and talk to you on the next episode. Please note that the information shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only. It should not be considered financial or medical advice. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the host and the guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force.